Hey, David, what happens if we tax the rich too much? Do they leave the country? Do they stop working? Okay, so let's deal with this question again. There's an idea that is sometimes presented, which is if you tax the rich too much, they won't work anymore because it won't be worth it for them. They won't keep enough. The government takes too much of their money, it's not worth working. Or they will simply leave the country. Deal with these one by one. First of all, if you tax rich people, they will leave the country. Anecdotally, sure. Sometimes a rich person changes where they live. Sometimes it's for reasons related to taxation. Sometimes it's not. The truth is, the number of rich people that would leave the United States if taxes were somewhat higher, we're not talking about, I'm not at least talking about a 90% marginal tax rate starting at $1 million. I don't think that there's any evidence that would be good. The number of rich people who leave the country is relatively small. It's going to be more or less mathematically insignificant. Remember that most rich people want to live in the place where they have community, where their families are, where they speak the language. Sure, some rich people might leave if you tax them too much, but not at the levels at which studies suggest the richest Americans should be taxed. So the leaving the country thing is really quite a big distraction. Now, what about the possibility that if you tax a rich person too much, they will stop working? Here's the thing. You know how they say that first million is the toughest? That may or may not be true depending on whether you inherited it or actually built a business. But the reality is that in the same way that there's a diminishing marginal utility to money, if you have $1 billion, another 5 million does very little for you. If you have a dollar, $5 million does a lot for you. There's a diminishing marginal utility for money. But for a lot of these super rich people, it's much easier to build their wealth than it maybe was to get to where they were. Let me give you an example. If you have a net worth of $1 billion, more than likely, you can scale up your business 5% relatively easily compared to starting a business from scratch. So if you're being taxed, for example, at the 73% marginal tax rate on income above 10 million, that means if you go from $1 billion a year in income to 1.1 billion a year in income, right? Imagine you grow your business $100 million. You might pay 73% on that additional 100 million, but the relative amount of work that was required to get that additional 100 million was far smaller than it was to build your business to its first 100 million. So there's no question that if you tax the super rich 95% marginal tax rate above a certain level, that likely would be a disincentive to continue working. If it's, as most studies suggest, you want to top it out around 70 or 73% at very high incomes, it is very unlikely that it will have a significant effect in terms of getting rich people to abandon work. And in fact, the idea is that balancing everything, a top marginal tax rate around 70% would maximize government revenue. It accounts for the fact that some people may actually work less if they find out that their top income is going to be taxed at 70%. But even accounting for that, it is going to generate the most revenue for the government. We can debate whether it's ethical. We can debate whether it's fair. I'm fine having that debate. But to argue that rich people are simply going to leave the country or that rich people are going to stop working if we put in place something like a 70% top marginal tax rate, it's simply not backed by the data I've seen. If you have different data I should look at, let me know, and I'm glad to review and change my mind if the data warrants that. We have a great bonus show for you today. Make sure you are signed up for a membership at joinpakman.com. You will be treated to a producer Pat hosted bonus show today, and then I will be back with you on the bonus show on Monday.